I didn't realize I had been cut out of my own life until the invitation arrived without my name on it. It was a thick cream envelope, the kind people use when they want something to feel important. Formal, unquestionable. I found it wedged between grocery flyers and a credit card offer when I came home from work on a gray Tuesday evening in late October. I remember the exact smell of the hallway old carpet and someone else's dinner because moments like this tend to freeze details in place. The return address was my parents' house in Westbridge, Connecticut. Inside was a Christmas invitation, gold script, matching RSVP card, a printed schedule that included a family photo session on Christmas Eve dinner at 6 Gift Exchange after dessert. At the bottom in smaller type it read, "Immediate family only." I stared at the words longer than I should have. Immediate family. I was 32 years old, the oldest child, unmarried, childless, reliable to a fault. And yet my name wasn't printed anywhere. Not on the envelope, not on the card, not even scribbled in as an afterthought. For a moment I assumed it was a mistake. My mother, Patricia, had always been detail-oriented, but occasionally overwhelmed. She liked things done her way, but she wasn't careless. I pulled out my phone and texted my younger sister. "Hey, Lila, I think I got the Christmas invite by accident. My name's not on it." The reply came quickly. "It's not a mistake." That was all. No emoji, no explanation, just 4 words that felt heavier than they should have. I stood there in my coat keys, still in my hand, feeling something slide quietly out of place inside me. Not anger, not hurt. Something colder, like a realization that had been forming for years and had finally decided to speak up. I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice already tight, like she'd been bracing for impact. "Mom," I said calmly, "did you mean to leave me off the Christmas invitation?" There was a pause. Just long enough to tell me this conversation had already happened somewhere else without me. "It's not that you're left out," she said. "It's just, this year is complicated." "Complicated how?" "Well," she said, lowering her voice. "Your father and I felt it would be better to keep things simple." Simple, that word again. The one she used whenever something was being taken away quietly. "I am simple," I replied. "I work, I come home, I don't cause problems. How does excluding me make things simpler?" Another pause, this one heavier. "Your brother is bringing someone," she said finally. Of course he was. My younger brother, Mark, had always been the gravitational center of our family. Everything bent gently toward him. His moods, his decisions, his mistakes. They were all treated as weather patterns everyone else needed to adapt to. "And that affects me how I asked." Patricia sighed. "Ethan's parents will be there. They're traditional." I almost laughed. Almost. "So I'm an inconvenience now?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "You're just independent. You understand these things better than Lila does." There it was. The compliment disguised as a boundary. The reason I was always the one expected to adjust. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice even, "are you asking me not to come to Christmas?" "Yes," she said. And then, as if to soften it just this year, I looked around my apartment. The thrift store couch, the bookshelf I'd assembled myself, the framed photo of my grandmother Ruth taken before dementia softened her edges. I had built this life quietly without help, without complaint. I had shown up when asked, signed when needed, stepped back when told. And now I was being told calmly, politely that I didn't fit. "Okay," I said. She seemed surprised by how quickly I answered. "That's it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "That's it?" We hung up. No argument, no tears, no begging. I sat down at my small kitchen table and placed the invitation in front of me. I read it again slower this time, noticing details I hadn't before. The photographer's name, the venue for the family dinner, a restaurant I knew well. It was owned by a company I had helped fund 3 years earlier. Back then, my parents had come to me late one night with worried expressions and carefully chosen words. The family business, a regional property management firm called Hawthorne Group, needed temporary capital to secure a line of credit. Nothing permanent, nothing risky. They had framed it as helping the family. A bridge loan, short-term. My name wouldn't be visible. I trusted them. I signed. I hadn't thought about it much since. That was my mistake. I picked up my laptop and logged into my banking portal, then into the folder labeled Hawthorne. Old habits die hard. I kept records, quietly, thoroughly. As I scrolled, a pattern began to emerge. Guarantees, renewals, extensions, my signature appearing more often than I remembered. My exposure growing while my authority remained non-existent. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, mind sharp. The Christmas invitation wasn't the beginning. It was the signal. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being family and started being infrastructure. And infrastructure, I realized, is only noticed when it fails. I closed the laptop and looked again at the invitation. Immediate family only. For the first time, I didn't feel rejected. I felt informed. And as I folded the card and slid it back into the envelope, one thought settled clearly in my mind, calm and unmistakable. If I was no longer considered immediate family, then I was no longer obligated to act like it. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew this much. Something had shifted, and Christmas was only 8 weeks away. The next morning, nothing felt different. That was the unsettling part. I woke up at 6, like always. Showered, made coffee strong enough to sting, checked emails while standing at the counter because I had never bothered buying bar stools. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Cars honked. Someone argued loudly into a phone. A delivery truck idled too long under my window. Life hadn't reacted to the fact that I had just been quietly removed from my own family. At work, I went through meetings on autopilot. I worked as a senior operations analyst for a mid-sized logistics company called Northline Freight. Not glamorous, but stable. My boss, Denise Walker, trusted me. She handed me complex problems and expected clean solutions. No drama, no excuses. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from Lila. "Mom's upset. She thinks you're mad." I read it once, then again. I typed back. "I'm not mad." That was true. Anger requires surprise. I had already lived with the sense that my place in the family was conditional. This was just the first time they'd said it out loud. A few minutes later, another message appeared. "She says you always pull away instead of talking things through." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. Pull away? What an interesting way to describe stepping aside when someone closes a door. I didn't reply. That evening, I stopped by my grandmother Ruth's assisted living facility. I visited her every Thursday after work. It was the one routine I hadn't allowed anyone to interrupt. She was sitting by the window when I arrived, wrapped in a beige cardigan, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Some days she knew exactly who I was. Other days she recognized me by feeling alone. This was a good day. "Emma," she said when she saw me, my name clear and confident. "You look tired." "I'm fine," I said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "How are you?" She tilted her head. "Your mother's busy." That wasn't a question. "She usually is," I replied. Ruth studied me for a moment, the way she always had, like she could see through layers other people missed. "They don't know what to do with women like you," she said suddenly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You make yourself useful," she said, "and then you wait for permission to stop." I sat down slowly. She reached for my hand. Her grip was still surprisingly strong. "Don't wait too long," she added. "People get comfortable." On the drive home, her words echoed in my head. People get comfortable. By the end of the week, I had stopped thinking about Christmas altogether. Or so I told myself. I focused on work, on routine, on things that responded predictably to effort. Then on Friday afternoon, Denise called me into her office. "Close the door," she said. I did. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You're distracted." "I'm fine," I said automatically. She smiled slightly. "That's not an answer." I hesitated. Denise wasn't family. She didn't benefit from my silence. "My parents asked me not to come home for Christmas," I said. She raised an eyebrow, asked. I nodded. "That's unusual," she said carefully. "Yes." "And how do you feel about it?" I considered the question honestly. Clear. That seemed to surprise her. "Good," she said. "Clarity is useful." She slid a folder across the desk. "This came in yesterday. Hawthorne Group is applying for a revised commercial credit structure." My stomach tightened just slightly. "That's my family's company," I said. "I know," Denise replied. "Your name came up." "Why?" She opened the folder. "You're listed as a personal guarantor on multiple instruments. More than I expected." "How many?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately, just turned the folder so I could see. The number stared back at me neat and black on white. 6. 6 guarantees, some renewed, some expanded, all active. My name, my signature, my liability. No board seat, no voting rights, no visibility. I felt something click into place. "When was the last time one of these was updated?" I asked. 3 months ago, Denise said. "During the same quarter, your parents restructured internal leadership. That would have been around my birthday, the one they'd forgotten." I closed the folder slowly. "They didn't tell me," I said. "No," Denise replied. "They didn't." I didn't react. I didn't need to. "I need copies of everything," I said. "You'll have them by Monday," she said. Then gently, "Emma, this isn't small." "I know." That night, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop again. This time I didn't skim. I read every document, every clause, every quiet assumption baked into the language. The pattern was unmistakable. When Hawthorne Group grew, my exposure grew with it. When it stabilized, nothing was rolled back. They hadn't just excluded me from Christmas. They had excluded me from choice. And suddenly a lot of things made sense. The way decisions were announced, not discussed. The way my questions were met with reassurance instead of answers. The way I was praised for being low maintenance. Low maintenance people are easy to use. By midnight, I had a list. Documents to request. Accounts to separate. Questions to ask someone who wasn't emotionally invested in keeping me quiet. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about recognition. And once you recognize the structure you're standing in, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. I picked up my phone and saved a new contact. Jonathan Pierce, attorney, corporate and personal liability. I didn't call him. Not yet. But as I set the phone down, one thought settled firmly in my chest. If they thought excluding me would keep things simple, they had badly misunderstood what I was holding together. And they had no idea how fragile it all really was without me. I didn't call Jonathan Pierce right away. That restraint surprised even me. Instead, I did what I had always done best. I observed, I waited, I gathered information quietly while everyone else assumed nothing had changed. On Saturday morning, my mother called. Her voice was lighter than it had been all week, as if the decision about Christmas had already been filed away under-resolved. "Emma," she said, "I just wanted to check in." I held the phone between my shoulder and ear while rinsing a mug. "About what?" There was a brief pause. "You know, everything." "I'm fine," I said. She exhaled, relieved. "Good. I was worried you might be taking things the wrong way." I almost asked what the right way would have been. "Almost. We're just trying to keep the holidays peaceful," she continued. "Mark's been under a lot of stress." Of course he had. Mark was 30, lived in a renovated townhouse my parents helped him buy, and worked in sales at Hawthorne Group. His numbers were average. His confidence was not. "I understand," I said. "That's why you've always been so helpful," Patricia said warmly. "You see the bigger picture." I closed my eyes briefly. "By the way," she added casually, "your father mentioned that the bank might reach out to you. Routine stuff. Nothing to worry about." There it was. A heads-up disguised as reassurance. A preemptive softening of whatever consequences were coming. "What kind of routine stuff?" I asked. "Oh, signatures," she said quickly. "You've done it before." I pictured the folder on Denise's desk. 6 guarantees. Renewed 3 months ago, without my knowledge. "I haven't signed anything recently," I said. "Well, no," she replied a bit too fast. "But your name is already there. It's just formalities." "Formalities." I let the silence stretch. "Emma," she prompted. "I need to go," I said calmly. "I have plans." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. They were steady. That was important. I wanted to remember that. Later that afternoon, I drove to Westbridge. Not to confront anyone. To confirm. The Hawthorne Group offices occupied the ground floor of an old brick building near Main Street. I'd spent enough of my childhood there to know the layout by heart. The smell of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee hit me as soon as I stepped inside. My father, Thomas Hawthorne, was in his office. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner, more tired around the eyes. "Emma," he said, surprised but pleased. "This is a nice surprise." "Is it?" I asked gently. He waved me in. "Of course. Sit down." I didn't. "I wanted to ask you something," I said. "About the guarantees." His smile faltered just slightly. "What about them? How many am I currently attached to?" I asked. He hesitated. "That depends how you define attached," he said carefully. I nodded. "That tells me enough." "Emma," he said, standing now, "you know, we'd never put you at risk." "You already have," I replied. His shoulders slumped a little. "We needed flexibility," he said, "and you were the safest option." Safest. Not strongest, not most capable. Safest. Why wasn't I told? I asked. "You would have worried," he said softly. "And you've always trusted us." There it was again. Trust as a tool. "I trusted you because I thought we were honest with each other," I said. He looked away. Mark walked past the open doorway, then coffee in hand. He stopped when he saw me. "Oh," he said. "Hey." "Hi," I replied. He glanced between me and our father. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Thomas said quickly. "We're just talking business." Mark laughed. "Emma and business, of course." He leaned against the doorframe. "You always were good at cleaning things up." I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't malicious. He was comfortable. He had grown up believing this was how things worked. Emma handled the risk. Everyone else enjoyed the stability. "Mark," I said evenly, "did you know I was still personally guaranteeing company debt?" He blinked. "Well, yeah, I thought you knew." "I didn't," I said. He shrugged. "It's kind of your thing." Something shifted then, not dramatically, quietly. I smiled. "I see," I said. I left shortly after. No argument, no raised voices, just the sound of the door closing behind me and the knowledge that nothing I'd just learned was accidental. On the drive home, I called Jonathan Pierce. He answered on the second ring. "This is Jonathan." "My name is Emma Hawthorne," I said. "I need to understand my exposure." There was a pause, papers rustling. "Yes," he said slowly. "I've been expecting your call." That sentence landed harder than anything else had. "Why?" I asked. "Because," he replied, "your name has been holding up a lot of weight, and people usually notice that right before it shifts." I stared straight ahead as traffic blurred past. "I'm not looking to burn anything down," I said. "Good," he replied. "That gives us options." We scheduled a meeting for Monday morning. When I hung up, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Control. For the first time, the imbalance had a name. And once something is named, it can be addressed. Back at my apartment, I pulled the Christmas invitation out of the drawer and placed it on the counter. Immediate family only. I folded it once, twice, then slid it into the recycling bin. They had already decided who belonged. Now it was my turn to decide what I was willing to hold together for them, and what I was finally ready to let go. Jonathan Pierce's office was nothing like I expected. No glass walls, No dramatic skyline view. Just a quiet suite above a dry cleaner with worn leather chairs and shelves lined with binders that looked used, not decorative. He shook my hand once firmly and gestured for me to sit. "You're not here to fight," he said. "You're here to understand." "Yes," I replied. "That already puts you ahead of most people." He opened a folder with my name on it. Seeing it printed there felt strange, like proof that something private had crossed into the official world. "You are personally guaranteeing 6 obligations tied to Hawthorne Group," he said. 3 loans, 2 credit lines, 1 performance bond. I only agreed to one, I said. "I know," he replied. The others were extensions, renewals, and cross-collateralizations. Without my signature. "With your prior consent language," he said calmly, "which is why this isn't fraud, it's leverage." He slid a document toward me. "This clause," he said, tapping a paragraph, "allows the company to renew unless the guarantor withdraws in writing." "How much notice?" I asked. 30 days. I felt my jaw tighten. 30 days. That was all it would take. "And if I withdraw?" I asked. "The lenders reassess," he said. "They may demand replacement guarantees, additional collateral, or repayment." "Which the company may or may not be able to provide," I said. Jonathan nodded. "Correct. So the stability they've been enjoying," I said, slowly, "is conditional." "Entirely?" I leaned back, letting that settle. "I don't want to punish them," I said. "I just want to stop being exposed." "That's a reasonable goal," he said. "But you should know something." He paused. "When you withdraw, they will feel punished." I almost smiled. We spent the next hour reviewing timelines. What could be withdrawn when? What required coordination? What would trigger review clauses? Jonathan was thorough. He didn't dramatize. He didn't advise revenge. He advised us. "People panic when control shifts," he said, especially when they didn't know it was borrowed. When I left his office, the world felt sharper. Not hostile. Defined. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my parents, not Mark, not Lila. I went to work. I answered emails. I kept my routines intact. That weekend, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mother. Christmas schedule finalized, photos at noon, Christmas Eve, dinner at 7, can't wait to have everyone together. Everyone. I didn't respond. On Monday, Denise stopped by my desk. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Actually, better." She nodded. "Good. Let me know if you need anything." I did need something, but not from her. On Tuesday afternoon, I drafted the first letter. Formal, polite, clear. Notice of intent to withdraw personal guarantees, effective 30 days from receipt. I read it twice, then 3 times. No accusations, no explanations, just facts. I didn't send it yet. That night, I had dinner with Lila. She chose a neutral restaurant halfway between our apartments. She looked nervous when she arrived, smoothing her napkin like she was bracing for news. "Mom's worried," she said immediately. "She thinks you're pulling away." "I am," I replied. Why, she asked, genuinely confused. "You've always been the one who keeps things steady." I met her eyes. "That's exactly why." She frowned. "You make it sound like a bad thing." "It's only a bad thing when it's expected without consent," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Is this about Christmas?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Christmas is a symptom." "Then what is it?" I considered how much to say. "They've been using my name to secure the business," I said finally, without telling me. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What?" "For years," I added. "That's not okay," she said quickly. "Dad would never." "He already did," I said calmly. Her face flushed. "Maybe he thought you knew." Maybe I agreed, but thinking isn't the same as asking. She looked down at her plate. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to remove my guarantees," I said. Her head snapped up. "You can't." I raised an eyebrow. "Watch me." "Emma," she said, lowering her voice that could hurt everyone. "I know. Mark could lose his job," she said. "Mom and Dad could finally understand what they've been leaning on," I finished. She stared at me like she was seeing someone new. "You sound so cold," she said. I shook my head. "I sound calm. There's a difference." She didn't argue after that. On Thursday, my father called. "Emma," he said, tense. The bank reached out. "About what I asked." "About restructuring," he said. "They're asking questions." "Good," I replied. Silence. "Have you spoken to anyone?" he asked. "Yes," I said. His voice sharpened. "Why didn't you come to us first?" "Because every time I did before," I said evenly, "I was reassured instead of informed." "That's not fair," he snapped. "Neither was using my credit without my consent," I replied. Another pause, longer this time. "What do you want?" he asked finally. I looked out my window at the street below, at people walking freely, unaware of how much leverage can hide in quiet agreements. "I want out," I said, cleanly. "You're putting us in a difficult position," he said. "I was already there," I replied. "You just didn't notice." He hung up shortly after, not angrily, just abruptly. That night I sent the letter. Certified, tracked, documented. When I closed my laptop, I felt no rush, no thrill, just inevitability. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls. 2 from my mother, 1 from Mark. I showered, I dressed, I made coffee. I returned none of them, Because the thing about quiet leverage is this. Once it's acknowledged, it no longer belongs to the people who assumed it would always be there. And with 30 days ticking forward, I knew the calm I felt wouldn't last for them. But for me, it was just beginning. The panic didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in through the cracks disguised as concern, then urgency, then accusation. By Monday morning, my voicemail was full. My mother's messages shifted tone with each attempt. The first was cautious, the second emotional, the third clipped and sharp. Emma, this is not the way families handle things. I deleted it. Mark tried next. He didn't leave a voicemail. He texted. What are you doing? I didn't answer. At work, I focused on a distribution delay in Ohio that had nothing to do with Hawthorne Group. Trucks still needed rerouting. Contracts still needed clarity. The world continued to function outside my family's crisis, and I found comfort in that. Around noon, Denise stopped by again. They're scrambling, she said quietly. I looked up. Already? She nodded. Banks don't like uncertainty, especially when it's introduced silently. That word again, silently. I didn't raise my voice, I said. No, she agreed. You raised a boundary. That afternoon, Jonathan emailed an update. The first lender had acknowledged receipt of my notice. A review was underway. Replacement guarantees were being requested. From whom, I wondered. I had a pretty good idea. That evening, I agreed to meet my parents. Not at their house, not at the office. A neutral place. A quiet restaurant near the river where conversations stayed contained. My father arrived first. He looked smaller somehow, like the authority he carried had been borrowing its weight from something he no longer had access to. My mother followed, lips pressed tight, eyes already glossy. We ordered drinks. No one touched them. Why are you doing this? Patricia asked immediately. I'm undoing something I never agreed to, I said. You agreed years ago, Thomas said, his voice tired but firm. I agreed once I replied. You renewed without telling me. That's how business works, Mark said, sliding into the chair beside them. I hadn't invited him, but I wasn't surprised. That's how business works when everyone involved has authority, I said. I didn't. Patricia leaned forward. We needed you. You were reliable. I nodded. And you relied on that instead of asking. She recoiled slightly. You're acting like we betrayed you. You excluded me from Christmas, I said evenly, then tried to renew debt in my name. You didn't just betray me. You assumed I wouldn't notice. Silence fell over the table. Mark scoffed. You're blowing this out of proportion. I turned to him. You live in a house the company subsidized. You draw a salary that's higher than your performance justifies. You didn't notice because it benefited you not to. His jaw tightened. Thomas rubbed his temples. Emma, if you pull out completely, this could destabilize everything. I know, I said. And you're okay with that? Patricia asked, her voice breaking. I considered the question carefully. I'm okay with no longer being destabilized myself, I replied. My father looked at me, then really looked, and something shifted behind his eyes. You always were the strong one, he said quietly. I almost corrected him. Instead, I said I was the quiet one. The check arrived. No one offered to pay. I covered my share and stood. This doesn't have to become ugly, Thomas said quickly. We can work something out. We could have, I replied, before. I left without another word. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure escalated. Emails from accountants, calls from attorneys I didn't know. Messages framed as updates that were really attempts to draw me back into the conversation on their terms. Jonathan handled them all. They're trying to reinsert you, he said during one call. As a negotiator, as a savior. I'm neither, I said. Good, he replied. Then stay quiet. On Christmas Eve, I woke up alone. No schedule, no obligation, no performance. I made coffee and sat by the window as snow dusted the sidewalks below. Somewhere across town, my family was posing for photos, arranging smiles, pretending the foundation wasn't shifting beneath them. I didn't feel lonely. I felt present. That afternoon, Jonathan called. They've found a temporary replacement guarantor, he said. I closed my eyes. Who? Your mother, he replied. That landed exactly the way it should have. She insisted, he continued. Personal assets, retirement accounts, the house. I pictured Patricia signing papers she didn't fully understand, telling herself, this was what mothers did. Protect, absorb, preserve the illusion. And my father, I asked. He'll remain on as primary, Jonathan said. But this changes the balance. I thanked him and hung up. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Lila. Mom is exhausted. She says she didn't realize how much you were carrying. I typed back. Now she does. The final lender acknowledged my withdrawal 2 days after Christmas. My name was officially removed. The exposure was gone. What remained was theirs. I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce it. I simply woke up the next morning lighter than I had been in years. At work, Denise handed me a new project. A promotion discussion followed quietly a week later. Not because I demanded it, because I finally had the bandwidth to be seen. One evening, as I walked home under bare trees and winter sky, I realized something that surprised me. This wasn't revenge. Revenge requires an audience. This was correction. I had stepped out of a role that only existed because I never refused it. And now that I had the story my family told themselves about me was unraveling. Not loudly, but completely. And as January settled in, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Not the fallout, the redefinition. Because once you stop being the person who holds everything together, you have to decide who you are without that weight. And I was just beginning to understand what that meant. January stripped things down. The holidays ended, the decorations came down, and whatever illusion my family had been clinging to lost its cover. Without my guarantees quietly smoothing things over, Hawthorne Group had to operate in daylight. That was when the cracks began to show. I didn't hear it from them directly. I heard it sideways, through third parties, through small, unguarded comments that leaked out when people were tired or annoyed enough to forget I was no longer supposed to know things. The first call came from an old family accountant, Gerald Levin, who had known me since I was in college. "I'm probably overstepping," he said carefully, "but I wanted you to know your father's under a lot of pressure." I kept my voice neutral. "What kind of pressure?" "Cash flow," he said. "Lenders are nervous. Your withdrawal forced a review of internal controls." Internal controls. That was a polite way of saying things had been running on trust instead of structure. And I asked, "And trust doesn't count as collateral," he said quietly. I thanked him and ended the call. At work, my days were fuller, but calmer. With the family noise receding, I noticed how much energy I had been spending managing emotional volatility instead of actual problems. I stayed late because I wanted to, not because I was compensating for something unspoken. Denise noticed. "You're sharper," she said one afternoon. "More present." "I stopped carrying other people's risk," I replied. She smiled. "That'll do it." By mid-January, Mark finally called. Not texted, called. I let it ring once before answering. "What do you want?" he asked without preamble. I almost laughed. He sounded the same way he had when we were kids, and I refused to cover for him. "I'm listening," I said. "This is bigger than you," he snapped. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand exactly what I've done," I replied. I removed myself from obligations I didn't consent to. "You've put everyone on edge," he said. "Mom's barely sleeping." "That's unfortunate," I said evenly. "But it's not new. It's just visible now." He exhaled sharply. "Dad's thinking about selling." That got my attention. Selling what I asked. Parts of the portfolio, Mark said. Properties, accounts, stuff we built. You built, I thought, or leaned on. And I said, "And that wouldn't have happened if you'd just talked to us first." There it was, the rewritten history. "I did talk," I said. "You just didn't listen until consequences showed up." He was quiet for a moment. "You always do this," he said finally. "You detach." "No," I corrected him. "I stop absorbing." The call ended without resolution. A week later, my mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I saw her through the peephole, coat buttoned wrong hair, pulled back too tightly. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile. Unprepared. I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as if entering unfamiliar territory. "You didn't call," she said. "I didn't need to," I replied. She sat on the edge of my couch, hands folded, eyes darting around my apartment like she was trying to locate the version of me she used to manage. "I don't recognize you," she said. I leaned against the counter. "You never really did." Her lips trembled. "That's not fair." "Neither was excluding me from Christmas," I said, "or putting debt in my name without telling me." She flinched. "We never meant to hurt you," she said. "We just assumed that I'd handle it," I finished. She nodded. "I always have," I said. "That's the problem." She looked down at her hands. "Your father's health isn't good," she said quietly. I felt the pull immediately, the old reflex, the urge to soften. "I didn't." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but that doesn't change what happened." She looked up sharply. "So that's it? You're done with us?" I considered the question. "I'm done being used," I said. "If there's a relationship left after that, it has to be different." She stood abruptly. "Families don't work like contracts." "No," I agreed. "They work worse when boundaries are ignored." She left without hugging me. After she was gone, I sat down and waited for the guilt to arrive. It didn't. What came instead was something steadier. A sense that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and for the first time that felt like safety. By February, Hawthorne Group announced a partial sale. Nothing dramatic. Framed as strategic. Streamlining. But I knew better. They were compensating for the absence of invisible support. Lila called one night, voice low. "They're all blaming each other," she said. "Mom says Dad should have told you. Dad says Mom should have asked. Mark says you're punishing everyone." "And what do you think?" I asked. She hesitated. I think I didn't realize how much you were holding." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. The truth settled in slowly. My family wasn't collapsing because I left. They were wobbling because they'd never built anything that could stand without me propping it up. And that realization, once seen, couldn't be unseen. One evening, as I reviewed a new project proposal at work, Jonathan emailed. Subject line update. The message was brief. "Hawthorne Group has initiated internal restructuring. Your name no longer appears on any current or pending obligations. No further action required on your end." I leaned back in my chair and let the words sink in. No further action required. For years, my role had been unspoken action, continuous, assumed. Now there was nothing left to do. And that was the most unsettling freedom of all. Because once you stop reacting, once you stop holding the system together, the final question arrives quietly, without drama. What do you build next? As February wore on, I felt the answer forming. Not revenge, not reconciliation, something cleaner, something mine. And I knew without quite knowing how that whatever came next would force the truth out into the open. Not through confrontation, through absence. And absence, I was learning, can be louder than any argument. The first thing I built after leaving my family's gravity wasn't a business. It was space. Not the romantic kind people post about, but the practical kind that shows you what you've been avoiding. Evenings without interruption. Weekends without obligation. Mornings where no one else's crisis set the tone for my day. At first, the silence was loud. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, expecting a demand, a subtle pull, a reminder that I was needed somewhere else. When it didn't come, there was a strange emptiness. Not loneliness, disorientation. I had spent most of my adult life being essential to someone else's stability. When that stopped, I had to learn how to be essential to myself. That learning curve was steeper than I expected. At work, Denise called me into her office again, this time without preamble. I'm going to be direct, she said. We're opening a new role. Director of Operations Strategy. I waited. It's yours if you want it, she continued. But I need to know something first. What I asked. She met my eyes. Are you going to disappear? I understood the question. No, I said. I've done enough disappearing. She nodded once. Good, because this role requires someone who can say no. The promotion came with a raise, expanded authority, and visibility I'd never chased before. I accepted without fanfare, without guilt, without asking permission from ghosts. That night, I told no one in my family. I didn't need their validation anymore, and I wasn't offering it as proof of anything. It was simply a decision made in alignment with the life I was building now. A few days later, Ruth's facility called. My grandmother had taken a turn. I drove there after work, the familiar route lined with bare trees and low winter light. The building smelled like antiseptic and lemon cleaner, a scent that always made me think of transitions. She was awake when I arrived, eyes sharp, fingers curled loosely around the blanket. You look lighter, she said when she saw me. I feel different, I replied, taking her hand. She studied my face. They finally noticed. Yes, I said, but not the way they expected. She smiled faintly. That's how it usually goes. We sat in silence for a while. Then she spoke again. Your mother is afraid, she said. I know. Fear makes people small, she continued. And small people tighten their grip. I'm not in it anymore, I said. No, she agreed. You stepped out. That takes courage. She squeezed my hand. Promise me something. What? Don't go back just because it hurts them, she said. They'll survive the truth. I promised. When she fell asleep, I stayed a few extra minutes listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Then I left. On the way home, I passed the Hawthorne Group building without meaning to. The lights were on later than usual. Cars still in the lot. They were working harder now. Good. A week later, Mark showed up at my office. Not my apartment, not my parents' house. My office. The receptionist buzzed me uncertain. He says it's urgent, she said. I closed my eyes briefly. Send him in. Mark looked out of place among the clean lines and quiet focus of the space. He didn't sit down. This is ridiculous, he said. You forced everyone to adjust. I didn't force anything, I replied. I withdrew. You're acting like a martyr, he snapped. No, I said calmly. I'm acting like an adult. He paced. Dad's being pushed out, investors are circling, people are asking questions. That should have happened years ago, I said. You're enjoying this, he accused. I looked at him steadily. If I were enjoying it, I'd be watching. I'm not. I'm busy. He stopped pacing. You think you're better than us now, he said. No, I replied. I think I'm separate. That landed. He left without another word. That night, my mother emailed me. Long, careful, filled with memory and guilt, dressed as nostalgia. She wrote about holidays past, about sacrifices, about how families stick together even when things are hard. She never mentioned the guarantees, or Christmas, or the fact that she had taken on financial risk she didn't fully understand to keep things afloat. I read it once. Then I archived it. Not deleted, archived. Because I wasn't erasing them. I was placing them where they belonged. By March, Hawthorne Group announced another restructuring, this time publicly. A press release about strategic realignment and leadership changes. My father stepped down as CEO. Mark was promoted. On paper, it looked like progress. In reality, it was a reshuffling of fear. Lila called me the night the announcement went live. He's not ready, she said quietly. No, I agreed. But readiness wasn't the deciding factor. What was she asked? Familiarity, I replied. She sighed. They still talk about you. I smiled faintly. Of course they do. I was the absence they hadn't accounted for. At work, I thrived. Not because I worked harder, but because I worked honestly. I delegated. I declined. I chose projects that aligned with my strengths instead of filling gaps no one else wanted to address. One afternoon, Denise leaned into my doorway. You're different, she said. Not colder, clearer. I stopped mistaking responsibility for love, I said. She nodded. That'll change everything. It already had. In early April, Jonathan called again. I wanted you to hear this from me, he said. There's talk of revisiting past agreements. I tensed slightly. What kind of talk? Your parents' legal team is reviewing historical documents, he said. Estate planning, trust structures. I exhaled slowly. They're trying to contain exposure, he added. Not yours, theirs. What does that mean for me? I asked. For now, he said nothing, but it tells me something is coming. After we hung up, I sat in my office long after everyone else had left, watching the city lights flicker on. They were reorganizing, not to make things right, to protect what was left. And for the first time, I understood the real shift. This was no longer about money or guarantees. It was about narrative, about who would be remembered as responsible, who would be framed as difficult, who would be quietly erased. I wasn't afraid. I had documentation, distance, clarity, but I knew enough to recognize the shape of what was forming. When people lose control, they don't always reach for reconciliation. Sometimes they reach for revision. And as I locked up that night, one thought stayed with me, sharp and steady. I had stepped out of their system, but they were about to try to rewrite why. And when that happens, silence alone is no longer enough. The revision didn't come loudly. It arrived wrapped in civility. 2 weeks after Jonathan's warning, I received a letter in the mail. Not certified, not urgent, cream paper, conservative font, the kind of letter meant to feel reasonable. It was from my parents' estate attorney, a man named Howard Klein I had met exactly once years earlier at a Thanksgiving dinner where he talked more about tax shelters than food. The letter thanked me for my past support of Hawthorne Group. It acknowledged my significant contributions. Then it pivoted. It stated that recent changes required a clarification of historical roles and intentions to ensure family harmony and accurate legacy planning. I read that sentence twice. Clarification, harmony, legacy. These words were never used when money was being signed away in my name. The letter concluded with a request. They wanted me to sign a statement affirming that my involvement with Hawthorne Group had always been voluntary, informal, and non-essential, and that my withdrawal had been a personal choice, unrelated to any misconduct or misrepresentation by the company or its leadership. In other words, they wanted me to officially agree that nothing wrong had happened. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on my desk. I didn't feel insulted. I felt measured. This was the next move. Not retaliation, containment. They weren't trying to pull me back anymore. They were trying to make sure I couldn't speak forward. I forwarded the letter to Jonathan. His response came an hour later. Do not sign anything. This is narrative control, not housekeeping. We should talk. We did. This is preemptive defense, he said over the phone. They're worried about exposure, not just financial, reputational. Because people are asking questions, I said. Yes, he replied. And because silence becomes dangerous once someone realizes it wasn't consent. What happens if I refuse, I asked. They adjust, he said. They may escalate. Or they may try to isolate you further. I looked around my office. The new role, the projects, the quiet confidence I had built piece by piece. I'm already isolated, I said, by choice. Good, Jonathan replied. Then you're not exposed. You're positioned. That word again. Positioned. I didn't respond to the letter. Not immediately. Instead, I waited. 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice was softer than it had been in months. Careful, almost rehearsed. We need to talk, she said. He said. I know, I replied. Can we meet, she asked. Just us. I considered it. Yes, I said, but not at the house. We met at a quiet cafe near the river. Neutral ground. No history built into the walls. She arrived early. I could tell by the way she watched the door when I walked in. You look well, she said. So do you, I replied. That wasn't true. She looked tired, pulled tight at the edges. She didn't waste time. Howard sent you something, she said. Yes. And she asked. And I'm not signing it, I said. Her mouth tightened. Why not? Because it's inaccurate, I replied. And because it asks me to erase my own experience. She leaned forward. It's just a formality. No, I said calmly. It's a record. She shook her head. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I met her gaze. You're asking me to say I was never essential after years of treating me like a safety net. Her eyes flashed. You chose to help. I chose once, I said. You chose every time after that without asking. Silence stretched between us. This isn't about blame, she said finally. It's about protecting the family. From what I asked, she hesitated. The truth, I said gently. She looked away. People are talking, she admitted. Investors, advisors, they want clean lines. Clean lines come from clean behavior, I replied. She inhaled sharply. You don't understand how much pressure we're under. I nodded. I do. I lived under it for years. She looked back at me, eyes glossy. If you don't sign, it could get messy. I felt the old reflex stir, the instinct to absorb discomfort so others could stay calm. I let it pass. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said, but I won't lie for you. Her shoulders slumped. So what do you want? She asked. I thought about it. I want nothing, I said. That's the point. She left shortly after her coffee untouched. That night I drafted my response. Not emotional, not defensive. I stated that I could not sign any document that mischaracterized my role, my knowledge, or my consent. I affirmed that my withdrawal had been based on previously undisclosed exposure and that any future communication should go through counsel. Jonathan approved it with one line of feedback. Clear, appropriate, final. The escalation came quietly. A week later, Lila called. They're saying you were always distant, she said. That you never really wanted to be involved. I smiled faintly. Of course they are. They're rewriting it, she said. I know. Does that bother you? She asked. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. It would have once. What changed? I stopped needing them to understand me, I replied. I just need the record to be accurate. At work, Denise noticed the shift. You're bracing, she said one afternoon. I'm preparing, I corrected. For what? For them to realize I won't play along. That realization came faster than expected. Jonathan called me on a Friday evening. They've withdrawn the request, he said. For now. I exhaled slowly. But he continued, they've initiated estate revisions, trust amendments, restructuring beneficiary language. They're cutting me out, I said. Yes, he replied, formally. I closed my eyes, not because it hurt, because it confirmed everything. They think if they erase me on paper, I said it will erase the imbalance. Paper doesn't erase history, Jonathan said, but it does signal intent. I looked out my window at the city settling into night. Let them, I said. There was a pause on the line. You're sure, he asked. Yes, I said. I don't want anything that comes with conditions. When we hung up, I sat alone in the quiet. This was the moment they had chosen. Not reconciliation, not accountability, removal. They were willing to lose me entirely to preserve a version of themselves that didn't include my consent. And strangely, that clarity felt like relief. Because when someone shows you that they would rather rewrite reality than face it, the decision becomes simple. You stop negotiating with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to stay legible to those invested in erasing you. And you prepare, not to strike back, but to stand still while the story collapses under its own weight. Because the truth doesn't need force, it just needs time. And time I knew now was finally on my side. The formal notice arrived on a Thursday morning tucked between a utility bill and a catalog I hadn't ordered. This one was certified. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter, poured coffee, and stood by the window watching the city wake up, people moving with purpose, buses hissing at corners, someone laughing too loudly on the sidewalk below. Ordinary life, continuing, indifferent to the fact that I was about to be officially written out of my own family's future. When I finally opened the envelope, there was no shock left to absorb. The language was precise, almost elegant. Amendments to the family trust, revisions to beneficiary designations, clarifications of intent. My name appeared only once referenced as a prior participant whose involvement had concluded by mutual understanding. Mutual. I read it twice, not to confirm the meaning, but to understand the strategy. They weren't punishing me. They were protecting themselves from a version of events where I had agency. By removing me entirely, they could present a cleaner narrative. One where I was peripheral, temporary, optional. I folded the document and placed it in my bag. At work, I functioned normally. Meetings, decisions, emails that required my attention and rewarded it with clarity. I noticed how easily my mind moved now that it wasn't divided between professional problems and emotional vigilance. Around mid-morning, Jonathan called. You got it, he said. Yes, any reaction. None, I replied. He paused. That's not what most people say. I already mourned the relationship, I said. This is just paperwork catching up. He exhaled softly. There is something else. I waited. They've also updated corporate records, he said. Removing references to you from historical documents where possible. That won't hold, I said. No, he agreed. But it signals intent. They want a version of history that doesn't require explanation. I leaned back in my chair, and I asked, and that creates risk, he said, for them. How so? Because when people revise records, instead of addressing behavior, he said it invites scrutiny, especially if someone else still has documentation. I looked at the file cabinet beside my desk. Years of emails, signed agreements, renewal notices, quiet acknowledgments. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I know, he replied, and neither did they. That afternoon, Denise asked me to walk with her. We stepped outside, the air sharp with early spring chill. You're carrying something, she said. They cut me out, I replied. She didn't ask who. Does that change anything, she asked. No, I said. It clarifies. She nodded. Then you're ahead. That evening, Lila came over. She looked exhausted. Pulled thin by weeks of tension she didn't create but couldn't escape. They made it official, she said quietly. Yes! She sat at my table, wrapping her hands around a mug she hadn't asked for, but needed. They say you left, she continued, that you didn't want to be part of things anymore. I met her eyes. Do you believe that? She hesitated, then shook her head. No. Then that's enough, I said. She swallowed. Mom says you're cold. I smiled faintly. Mom says that when she can't control the temperature. Lila let out a small, tired laugh. What happens now? I considered the question. Now I said they live with the structure they built without me. She studied me. You're not going to fight this. I already did, I said, by leaving cleanly. She nodded slowly as if filing that away. Before she left, she paused at the door. They're nervous, she said. About you? Why, I asked. They don't know what you'll do. I watched the door close behind her. Neither did they, but the truth was simpler than they imagined. I wasn't planning a counterattack. I wasn't going to sue or expose or confront. I was going to exist openly with the truth intact. And that I knew was what scared them most, because power doesn't always come from action. Sometimes it comes from refusing to participate in the lie that kept everyone comfortable. A week later, an unexpected email arrived. Subject, due diligence inquiry. It was from a private equity firm evaluating Hawthorne Group as a potential minority investor. They wanted background, governance clarity, historical context. Specifically, they wanted to understand why a long-standing guarantor and advisor had exited so abruptly. I forwarded the email to Jonathan. His response came quickly. We respond factually. Limited scope, no commentary. I agreed. We drafted a clean, neutral statement. Dates, roles, documentation of withdrawal. No accusations, no emotion. Just truth. 2 days later, the firm withdrew from consideration. No explanation given. That was the moment I understood the full arc. My family thought erasing me would simplify things. Instead, it exposed how much of their stability had depended on someone they were now pretending never mattered. I didn't celebrate. I sat in my apartment that night, lights low city humming beyond the windows, and felt something settle into place. Not victory. Alignment. They had chosen revision. I had chosen reality. And reality, unlike narrative, has a way of asserting itself quietly, repeatedly, until no amount of editing can hold it back. As I turned off the light and went to bed, one thought stayed with me. I had lost my place in their story, but I had finally gained authorship of my own, and that I knew was only the beginning of what would follow. The first real consequence didn't land where I expected it to. It didn't come through my parents or Mark. It came through the board. Jonathan called me early on a Monday morning. His voice was steady, but there was a note of precision that told me this wasn't casual. The Hawthorne Group board has opened an internal review, he said. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling untouched. About what I asked, even though I already knew. Governance, he replied, risk exposure, historical guarantees. I closed my eyes briefly. They're trying to understand how much of the company's stability was informal, he continued, and how much of it rested on you. I didn't answer right away. For years, my role had lived in a gray space. Not an employee, not an owner, not officially accountable, but quietly essential. I had signed letters no one else wanted to sign. I had made calls that smoothed things over when numbers didn't line up. I had absorbed volatility so the surface could stay calm. And now that buffer was gone. What do they want from me, I asked. Nothing, Jonathan said. That's the problem. I frowned. Explain. They can't ask you to clarify, he said, because that would acknowledge you mattered, and they've already committed on paper to the opposite. I leaned back in my chair. So they're investigating a system they designed to pretend I wasn't part of, I said. Yes, he replied, which means they're investigating themselves. At work, the day moved forward like any other. A budget review, a strategy session. A decision that would have taken weeks in my old life, now resolved in 40 minutes. Control feels different when it's clean. That afternoon, Denise forwarded me an article. Hawthorne Group delays expansion amid governance questions. I read it once. The language was careful, neutral, but the implication was clear. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, my father called. It was the first time he had reached out directly since everything began. I let it ring twice before answering. Yes, I said. His voice was strained, older than I remembered. They're asking questions, he said. I know, I replied. They don't understand how things were structured, he continued. I stayed silent. You could help clarify, he said. There it was. I won't, I said calmly. A sharp inhale on the other end of the line. You owe us that, he said. No, I replied. I don't. You were part of this, he insisted. You benefited. I participated, I corrected. Under assumptions you controlled. That's semantics, he snapped. No, I said. That's accountability. The line went quiet for a moment. You're going to let this damage everything we built, he asked. I thought about it. No, I said. I'm letting it reveal what was built. He hung up without saying goodbye. The fallout accelerated after that. Within days, vendors began renegotiating terms. Banks requested additional disclosures. Advisors who had once deferred now asked for documentation. Mark called twice. I didn't answer. Lila texted once. It's getting bad, I replied with one sentence. I'm sorry you're in the middle. She didn't respond. At night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because things were easy, because they were honest. 1 week later, Jonathan called again. There's a hearing, he said. Not public. Internal arbitration between Hawthorne Group and one of its lenders. And I asked. They're arguing that prior guarantees were misrepresented, he said. That the company relied on informal assurances that were never codified. I exhaled slowly. And now I asked. Now they're realizing those assurances ended when you left, he said. And they don't have a replacement. I stared out the window at the quiet street below. I didn't take anything from them, I said. No, Jonathan replied. You just stopped giving. That distinction mattered more than anything else. The following Friday, Denise stopped by my office again. You okay? She asked. Yes, I said honestly. She smiled. Good, because I want you focused. On what? She slid a folder onto my desk. A partnership, she said, with a firm that values transparency, clean governance, no family entanglements. I opened the folder. The numbers were solid, the structure clean. This is mine, I asked. It is, she replied, if you want it. I nodded once. I do. That night, I sat alone with a glass of wine I didn't finish. I thought about how many years I had spent believing that loyalty meant endurance, that love meant staying even when the cost was invisible but constant. Walking away hadn't destroyed my family's power. It had simply removed the illusion that it was sustainable. The phone buzzed once more before midnight, a message from an unknown number. You didn't have to do this. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed back. I didn't. I stopped pretending. I turned the phone face down and let the silence return, because the truth had finally reached the surface. And once it does, nothing can push it back under. By the time the apology arrived, it was already too late. It came in the form of an email from my mother sent just after midnight. No subject line. Just her name in the preview, like a hand hovering over a door she wasn't sure she should open. I read it once then again, in the morning with coffee and clearer eyes. She wrote that things had gone further than she expected, that pressure had come from places she hadn't anticipated, that she missed me, that none of this had been meant to hurt me. There was no acknowledgement of choice, no recognition of control, just regret shaped carefully to avoid responsibility. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, because the apology was designed to restore access, not repair damage. At work, the partnership Denise had offered moved quickly. Too quickly, some might have said. But clean structures move faster than tangled ones. In our first joint meeting, the lead counsel asked a question that caught me off guard. What made you step away from Hawthorne Group? He asked. I answered simply. The risk wasn't disclosed. He nodded once. No follow-up, no judgment. That was the difference. Truth didn't need defense in the right room. Later that afternoon, Jonathan called with an update. The arbitration didn't go well for them, he said. I waited. The lender ruled that reliance on informal guarantees without documentation constituted internal misrepresentation, he continued. They've been required to restructure debt under stricter terms. I closed my eyes briefly. That's significant, I said. Yes, he replied. It limits liquidity and flexibility. Mark won't like that, I said. Jonathan paused. Mark is being questioned. I opened my eyes. About what? Decision-making authority, he said, and whether he knowingly continued practices that lacked formal backing. I exhaled slowly. Did they mention me? I asked. Yes, he said, but only as an absence. That was enough. That evening, Lila showed up unannounced. She looked thinner, sharper around the edges, like someone who hadn't slept enough. They want to talk to you, she said without preamble. I know, I replied. They think if you explain... I won't, I interrupted gently. She sank into a chair. They're scared, she said. I was scared for years, I replied. That didn't stop anyone. She rubbed her temples. Mom keeps saying if you'd just come back. There is no back, I said, only forward. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in a long while. You're not angry, she said. No, I replied, I'm done. She nodded slowly. That's worse. Maybe it was. A week later, Hawthorne Group announced the suspension of 2 expansion projects. The stock dipped, advisors resigned quietly. A new interim consultant was brought in to assess cultural alignment. I read the press release without satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. The difference mattered. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, Denise stopped me. Can I ask you something personal, she said. Yes. Do you ever regret not explaining yourself? She asked. I thought about the years I had spent explaining, softening, translating. No, I said. People who want to understand don't need explanations. People who don't will never accept them. She smiled. Assault. I'm glad you're here. So am I replied. That night, I found a box in the back of my closet. Old documents I had almost thrown out months earlier. Inside were copies of the original guarantee letters, emails acknowledging my role, notes from meetings that had never made it into minutes. I didn't need them anymore, but I kept them anyway. Not as leverage, as proof, because truth doesn't expire just because someone rewrites the present. The final call came late on a Sunday. It was my father again. This time his voice was quiet. We're stepping down, he said, both of us. I didn't ask who he meant. They're bringing in outside leadership, he continued. The board insisted. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. He hesitated. You could have stopped this, he said. Yes, I replied, by continuing to disappear. Silence. I hope you're happy, he said. I thought about my mornings, my work, the absence of dread. I'm at peace, I said. He didn't respond. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time, not grieving, letting go. Because when power shifts, it doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like quiet rooms and closed doors and the steady realization that you no longer belong to a system that depended on your silence. And that realization, once it settles in, doesn't leave space for regret. Only clarity. And clarity, I had learned, is its own kind of freedom. The first winter after everything ended was quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Not empty, not lonely. Intentional. I stopped measuring time by family events I was expected to attend or calls I braced myself for. Weeks passed without tension sneaking into my shoulders. Holidays arrived without negotiation. On Christmas morning, I woke up late, made coffee, and watched snow fall outside my window without waiting for my phone to ring. No apology followed, no last-minute guilt, no obligation disguised as tradition. That was when I understood the final shift had already happened. Not in them, in me. At work, the partnership Denise had trusted me with closed cleanly. No hidden clauses, no personal leverage masked as loyalty. Just clear terms and mutual respect. The board congratulated me. I accepted with a nod and went back to work. Power feels different when it's earned without erosion. In February, I received one final message from my mother. I hope someday you'll understand why we did what we did. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing my response. I understand, I just don't agree. Then I archived the thread. That was the last communication we had. Spring arrived slowly. I started walking in the mornings before work, letting the city wake up around beds. I noticed things I had never had space for before. The sound of delivery trucks, the smell of bakeries opening their doors, the way sunlight moved between buildings. Small truths that require attention to exist. One afternoon, I ran into Lila by chance. She looked different, softer, not lighter, but steadier. They're rebuilding, she said, without you. I know, I replied. They still talk about you, she added. I know, I said again. She hesitated. Do you ever think about coming back not to the company, just to the family? I considered the question honestly. I think about boundaries, I said, and whether they're respected. She nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. I hope they learn, she said. So do I replied. But learning isn't something I can do for them. We parted without drama. That night, I stood by my window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about the version of myself who had once believed endurance was love, who mistook responsibility for belonging, who accepted silence as the price of peace. That person had survived, but she was no longer in charge. I had learned something essential. Revenge doesn't always arrive as payback. Sometimes it arrives as distance, as clean separation, as refusing to carry what was never yours. My family lost control not because I took it from them, but because I stopped giving them access to it. That was the real reversal. The power they thought they held was always conditional on my compliance. Once that ended, so did the illusion. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of my story, here's what I learned the hard way. Love that demands silence is not love. Belonging that requires erasure is not belonging. And choosing yourself does not make you cruel. It makes you honest. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, comment, or subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from and whether there was a moment in your life when you realized silence was no longer an option. Because the moment you stop disappearing is the moment everything begins to change.